Today, I'm going to play matchmaker. Reliable supply planner looking to settle down with a consistent partner. And a lonely demand planner seeking to be appreciated. Also likes long walks on the beach. Let's see if we can bring these two together. If you like what you hear or you like what you see, swipe right and let's get to it. Welcome. The next installment of IBF On Demand, wherever you get your podcasts and on here on YouTube. Sponsored by Arkieva, your one-stop S&OP software solution. We actually have a very special guest today as well. We're going to talk a little bit about supply and how it's the partner of demand and how they two work together. And he's actually with Arkieva, but he's got some great insights you want to stick around and be able to hear. So I opened it talking about bringing people together. And that's really what we're about. We're bringing a community together to talk about demand planning, supply chain, forecasting, predictive analytics, S&OP, related fields. We're really about fostering the growth and about a community coming together. So please like, share, subscribe. But more importantly, become a member of the IBF and be part of this community as well. We had some great feedback on episode 5 on S&OP is dead. If you didn't check that one, check that episode out as well. We want to see some feedback on this as well. Let us know what you're liking, what you need, what you want to hear in the future. Write to me at eric@ibf.org or put your comments down below. And I'll be sure to try to respond back with every comment you have so we can find out what you want to hear and provide that content you going forward. One thing we keep hearing is we're not living in a silo. This isn't a siloed business function that we have. We actually communicate demand planning with every function in the organization sometimes to be able to get input and feed them the input insights they need. And we can't have this siloed mentality. We need to start working with other people and understanding with that a little bit about them. The best plans not only need to be transparent, but they have strong execution. They need to be collaborative as well. The wrong way to think about it is supply planning or supply chain needs us or needs a forecast. It's completely the wrong way to think about this. We need each other. And the best way to understand exactly what their needs are, the best way to understand anybody's is to walk a mile in their shoes. So I thought, what better opportunity to bring in someone who's got years of experience in how those two work together, in bringing that supply planner and demand planner together on the same page and working together. Some insights into what exactly supply chain and supply planning does so you can understand it better, so you can work with them and cater your insights to what their needs may be a little bit more efficiently as well. Before joining Arkieva, back in 2013, he's Dr. Ken Fordyce, worked at IBM since 1977. He worked there for years. He's currently the Director of Analytics at Arkieva. Much of his career is focused on supply chain, demand, supply networks. He's a Doctor of Philosophy, MS in Operations, Research, and Statistics, and a BS in Math. He taught as an adjunct at Columbia and Pace. He's a recipient of multiple awards in his fields. He's written and still writes numerous articles and publications. I'm excited to have him on board. I'm very excited to have Ken Fordyce here today. Welcome, Ken. Over 30 years experience at IBM, now the Director of Analytics at Arkieva, a wealth of information, end-to-end, supply, demand, everything in between. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, it's the upside about being old is you get to do a lot of things, and IBM was a great environment because they constantly moved you around so you could see different aspects of the business. So it was, and I work with some outstanding people both at IBM and at Arkieva. So I've learned a lot.
Okay, well, I think with age like myself comes wisdom. I just missed out on the wisdom part, but looking at your experience, you definitely have some to be able to add to this audience today. So I'm glad you're on board. So recently, Yeah,
Go ahead.
recently, I think last month you had an article about demand management partner in crime, and it was a great article. I wanted to have you in to kind of elaborate on that blog. You can actually check it out at Arkieva's blog. It's called Demand Management's Partner in Crime. Came out last month. If you want to check it out, if you want to give a little bit of insights exactly about that blog, because I said I enjoyed it so much. I wanted to have you come in and talk a little bit about it, of how exactly is demand and supply really those partners in crime. So I'll kick it off. Give me a quick synopsis of that blog.
Well, the quick synopsis is historically organizations focus on demand management, or historically they focus on supply. Demand management, you're trying to assess what your demand is going to be, not only just an estimate or a point estimate, but you really, as you've pointed out in many of the things that you've written, the goal is to understand your demand, where the uncertainties are, where there aren't uncertainties. It's not just an issue of creating a point forecast. However, typically in most organizations initially that I've worked with, the people that are doing the supply side, or what I prefer to call central planning, are concerned about figuring out how to meet that demand. And the organizations are at best loosely coupled, and in worst cases, typically they're at best loosely coupled, but they really need to be tightly coupled, because you need, as you determine your demand, you need to understand how it's going to impact your central planning or your supply line. How can I actually meet that demand? What tools are going to be, what tool sets, what production capacity is going to indicate, what materials is going to be. And in fact, the organization only runs when the two of them are synchronized. So if you keep you have a tendency to develop them separately, because you have to divide and conquer for implementing software and models, but you need to tightly integrate them back to be a successful organization, be able to respond to changes in demand. That's the lesson I learned from my time at IBM, and then working with Harpel, and then other clients at Arkieva.
Okay, so you're talking really about being in sync. And one of the things I always talk about from a forecasting aspect is understanding exactly why you're doing the forecast, what the needs are. So if I understand my side of it, I understand, how to create a forecast. Give me that, why you need that forecast. What are you doing with that forecast? What, that day in the life of how you, consume forecasts on a daily basis. So what's the day in the life from a supply planning or central planning, as you call it?
Yeah, I prefer the term central planning, because supply planning can mean different things to different people. The day in the life of a central planner is, okay, here's my demand that I anticipate, and that demand is a revenue commitment that's made to the business. And so what they want to do, because that was a key lesson I learned. Somebody once went to me, said, executive I work for said, I said, well, why don't people say just change the demand if it's not right? She says, no. That's a business commitment, and I have to figure out how to meet that commitment. I can't just change it without going all the way back up and changing the finances. So typically what a central planner does is they look to ensure that they have the capacity and the raw materials in place at some level of aggregation that works for them. And if there isn't, then they have to, what we call, repair the plan. They have to go back and identify how that plan can be met. They can't go back and say, oh, guess what? I don't have enough oil today, and I'm going to get rid of that demand. So there's a whole repair process that goes on. But the very first thing is to understand specifically where you're most impacted. And they'll look to see which tool sets. I have a tendency to look at tool sets, or which raw material are marginal, that I don't have a lot of extra capacity, which ones I do have extra capacity on. And that's the day in their life. And then what will happen is, if they have a good relationship with their demand planner, they'll call up that demand planner and say, okay, can I actually move meeting this demand out? So for example, if you have line side stocking or vendor managed inventory, you have some flex there. So I used to go in and say, we're not going to meet that on time. And the boss would say, the director would say, that's okay, as long as I'm within a couple of days. Why? Oh, it's vendor managed inventory, and I specifically built that's got some flux. Or they'll come back and they'll say, no, we have to figure out how to make that. And that synergy goes on to make an organization, because an organization is always responding to change. As Harpel points out, is the CEO of Arkieva, it's not the plan I make today, it's the replanning that I need to do that makes me a successful organization.
That's definitely wise words there. So in essence, what I'm hearing from you is what you want from a central planning perspective is an unconstrained forecast.
Yes, typically what you do with the central plan is that variation is you give me that plan me generically, and then I want an unconstrained forecast, and then I'll assess what I can and can't do. So for example, if I need to add a new tool and it takes 6 months to add that new tool set, and you need this product on 2 months, we're going to have to go back to the client about that, because other than changing the laws of physics. But I want initially, so in the old days, and I can remember the old days through the 80s and the 90s, there was people, demand planners would come in and they'd say, well, I don't want to put this demand in because I don't think it can be met. And it took a while to culturally change them. And I've been through those changes in culture. Alternatively, the supply guys or the factory guys, they used to say, well, I really know what people are going to need. And we used to call it on a hunch, start a bunch. And it took my experience at IBM and some IBM customers at the time, it took about 2 years to change the culture, and a good demand planning system and a good central planning system becomes the central point to alter the culture. It's a guy named Stu Reed, who used to be the VP of supply chain at IBM, always worked on that. And then that is now everybody can hate the modelers, and instead of hating each other, we take all the abuse. So if you want to be an agent of change, don't go in without your armor. And don't go in without, you got to be thick-skinned about it, because your job in life is to enable culture change through your models and your systems.
Yeah.
And you don't get paid well for it either. So you got to really love it.
I got news for you, Ken. Those aren't the olden days. I hear that constantly still today, of that battle of constrained versus unconstrained forecast. And that's why I loved your answer, because one of the best practice IBF says is, as a demand planning forecast and demand manager, you need to have that unconstrained forecast so you know what your opportunities and risks are. You don't know them unless you first provide that as your starting point. And I love to hear your feedback on that, because those aren't the olden days. I still hear that battle today. People talking about that.
Well, I think the lesson from being old that I have is that I can tell you, it takes my experience, I'm sure your experience, it takes about 2 years to alter the culture. And then people can't remember life before that. So a guy I worked with for a long time, Gary Sullivan, said, I know my application is successful when people can't remember life without it. And the culture just changes. The organizations I've worked with where we've had success, they just can't remember life before that. That concept just doesn't exist. There's nobody, well, IBM's out of the business, but say if you go to Intel, there's nobody at Intel that's on a hunch starting a bunch. Nobody at some other clients I've worked with.
I love your at a hunch starting a bunch. So let me I want to just hit all the hot buttons today, since I have you on,
Sure.
Let's just hit all the hot buttons. Let's hit the one that I still hear contested, because we know the forecast is going to be wrong. And supply planners and central planners, purchasing, manufacturing, they're going to have to, they're the ones that get yelled at if they don't have it. So they're the ones that's going to fudge maybe some of that forecast. And in essence, what I'm saying is, one number forecast, you can't do it, can you?
No, and you shouldn't expect to be able to do a one number forecast, because it's just too much uncertainty. You can have the fanciest algorithms in the world, and I've written some of the fanciest algorithms in the world, but there's just that uncertainty in the future, and you just can't do it. But the purpose of a demand plan is to understand your demand, and where it makes sense, understand a range. So for example, if I'm trying to look at material and I have 10 products that all pull from the same material, like let's say I'm making shirts, and I make red shirts, blue shirts, green shirts, all I need is the aggregate demand across shirts to determine how much material I have. Now, when I actually put the shirt on the shelf at a Walmart, then I have to have a specific size and color. But I can ensure that I have enough material with that aggregate level, and they have to work as a synchronized unit to be able to respond. And then in about 2.5 years, typically what happens is people in the most successful organization I've seen, and I've seen some very successful organizations, they get out of the blame game and they work in a cooperative fashion.
And to go and get to that, I mean, what I heard you say is you are doing one set of assumptions. You are doing because you started off saying that the forecast is tied to revenue projections, what you think the company's going to be able to make. I mean, that's what you're forecasting. You're trying to hit that for the company. So you are living off the same assumption. So to really have that one team, one goal, it's about really having some type of consensus or one number attitude that you're talking about then, I guess, right?
Right. And then you have a consensus set of actions about what to take. I mean, in theory, you don't want to change that demand, but in face of reality, organizations will change. You just can't go into the executive right away and say, I can't meet the demand today, so we're just going to pack it up and go home. That becomes the deep dive that requires a deep dive back through your demand estimation process and your central planning process. And sometimes your central planning process, which runs at a certain level of aggregation, has to then deep dive deeper back into your procurement process or your factory planning system. And it's the goal is to get everybody to work as a team, which generally requires great leadership at the top.
Okay. You mentioned something in your earlier that really kind of stood out to me. You talked about the different shirts, your analogy, red shirts, blue shirts. And then you went down to the size and you said as long as you have the material, you can really be more agile to, at that level to which sizes you make based on, demand sensing or something of that sort. So I've seen companies, correct me if I'm wrong, that really demand is going to be at the lowest level. They're planning at the item size, color, when all the supply planner or central planning may need would maybe be that size. I mean, maybe be the color or maybe be the style, and they have the capability to really be agile at a different level. So, I mean, is there work to be done at what level of forecast you get opposed to just getting a forecast? Is the work to be done ahead of time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I only need a detailed item level forecast within the cycle time to produce or acquire the products. If you give me a detailed or item level forecast, let's say that it takes me 3 months to acquire the material and produce the shirts. If you give me a detailed item level forecast out 2 years from now, that's of very limited value. And you'll spend a lot of time. I understand why people do it because they feel comfortable with it. But I really need to do is to ensure that I have enough die in place, I have enough material in place, and I have enough cutting equipment in place. So that's because if you go back through the bill of material chain or the demand supply network, if you work back through it, those are the only things that I need to have in place. So it's if detail works for you and you're comfortable with that, that's a cultural item. I won't, but from my perspective, in terms of ensuring my value of the central planning engine, when I run a central planning engine 2 years out, is to ensure that I have enough production equipment, enough raw material in place to meet that anticipated demand. And later on, if you come back and you say to me, I wanted a few larges, few less larges, and a few more extra larges, then I have what I need in place. So that it's a concept of understanding your demand supply network. That's a term used by Carl Kemp, who's the director of decision sciences at Intel and a friend of mine for a long time. Probably the greatest agent of change of the 21st century in terms of the amount of altering how Intel approaches its work.
No, I like that because in essence, what you're saying is, what your challenge of the demand planners would be of understanding exactly what level of aggregation you need. It may not be down to the lowest granular level. So understand that level, understand, what you need. And then you mentioned another piece in there, the time horizon, the lag in there too. Because I've seen this happen a lot of times between, central planning and forecasting or business forecast is here's your forecast for 2 weeks from now when you have a 3-month lead time. Is there any value there in really matching that forecast to what your cadence, your rhythm is, and what you need? There's some importance there as well, right?
Yeah, let me make sure I understand it. So what you're saying is my lead time, say it's 2 months, and you're saying now I have a detailed forecast that's 2 weeks out. I have orders on the book.
Yep. Or the forecast. We have a week. I have a weekly forecast. This is an example I've seen. I have a weekly forecasting process. Right now, you're on a monthly cadence in the central planning, and you're out 3 months because you're outsourced a lot of your raw materials and products. So I'm giving you a weekly forecast, and you're on a monthly cadence, working out 3 months. Is there a connection there, and how do we make that connection?
No. Okay, so what you're saying is I redo my central planning central planning model every month, but I redo my demand. No. You got to synchronize those. In fact, you can take a very complex. So when I first was at IBM in 95, 96, we built the team there built some of the most advanced central planning engines around. And they used to take 20 hours to solve. Now that same planning engine solves in under an hour. So what happened was I'll talk about IBM, but in all organizations, people have to synchronize that central planning engine and the demand planning. They have to be synchronized so that you redo them in a logical synchronization, not a demand planning once a week and a new central plan once a month. Because what happens is everybody will build a bypass for it. When in doubt, open up your Excel, do your bypass, and they have to be synchronized. And in the very old days, this is not 1985, this is not 1995, this is 2020, and very complex productions, demand supply networks can be modeled in an hour. So what often happens is, once you get the hang of it, is you get into the thing of replanning every day. It's sort of like, wow, this thing only runs in 20 minutes. I'll replan every day. And then I've watched every organization back up and say, well, I don't need to do this every day because I thrash it too much. So every organization will go through that leveling off process to find the right one, as long as they continue to operate in a collaborative, coordinated fashion.
Yep. Exactly what I wanted to hear on that one. I only have a couple more questions for you. The other part of that I was talking about was that lead time. If you are operating at I've seen companies operate at 120-day lead times. So their purchasing signal, they need to know what the forecast is going to be out 4 months from now.
Right.
Is that a frozen zone and you don't touch the forecast in between? Is there value in really touching that forecast, after that signal's been done? If you're replanning on a monthly cadence still, what's the purpose of a frozen zone?
Well, typically what happens is, in a frozen zone, from a central planning perspective, that frozen zone is a technical concept that means I'm not going to change the production starts. Because I can't get I want to give a start decision to the factory. The factory is geared up to do that. Factory guys don't like change. They want to make the same thing every day, but they have to change. Or the same with the procurement guys. So typically a frozen zone is a technical term that's applied in the central planning engine. We put them in all the time, where I have a fixed set of starts that I don't want to change. That doesn't mean that you never change them. It simply means that you prefer not to. Now, if you have a demand statement that comes in, typically your demand near term typically doesn't change very much because you have fixed orders and commitments. You generally won't allow a forecast in. You won't come back unless it all depends on the size of the customer. A great customer comes in and my product normally sells for $4 and they're going to pay $400. Well, now I'm willing to change. I'll absorb that. But typically that doesn't happen. So you try not to let that happen. But if it does happen, you don't shut it down simply because it's your rule. You have to make a business assessment to it. And the models are subject to the intelligence and the business assessment. And the goal of good software is to enable your supply planners, your central planners, your demand planners, and your executives to think through the key business decisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, one last question before we have to go is, you mentioned the kind of where we come technology-wise and bringing those together. I mean, I think there's a kind of make sure demand and supply central planning needs to really be tied together technologically now as well. I think you can't operate out of Excel nowadays with what you're doing.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, and I'm good at Excel, and I wouldn't operate out of Excel. So I've got, and I wouldn't, you don't run it just like you wouldn't run it in assembler. And I'm old enough to have had to learn assembler and be good at it to keep my job, but not anymore. So you just can't. Excel, just go in and try to. So Excel is what I call, and I'm good at it, but I wrote a reasonably complicated scheduling application in Excel for some people I know at a local hospital, just to help them out, to get it started. And then they asked me to do a change on it, and I had to go back, and I couldn't remember what it did anymore. So I actually had to write it in a regular programming language in order to be able to check that the answers in Excel were correct. And I kept it in Excel right now only because that's their delivery vehicle.
I've been there.
Yep.
I've been there. I've been there as well.
So in fact, at Arkieva, I get all the best jobs because when somebody, Excel is a great way to learn things. It's a great way to get started. And what happens is often the documentation is inside the Excel code. So some of the younger folks around here say, well, we'll send it to Ken because he's really good at reverse engineering Excel.
I guess it's something to be known for there.
Yeah, well, it just means I'm really old and essentially obsolete. So,
as I said at the beginning, it's not age, it's wisdom. And I want to thank you, Ken. You brought a lot of wisdom to this.
Harpo reminds me it's age. So,
so thank you, Ken Fordyce, for being part of this as well. I say get some good insights exactly what that central planning, and make sure you check out his blog. Said it came out last month. Demand Management, the Partner in Crime, talks a little bit more in depth about exactly what we're talking about. It's a definitely worth the read. So thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you. And this is a great series. IBF is the right term, right? That you guys do a great job at providing information to people that are getting started or people that are experienced. And you guys have a journal, right?
Journal of Business Forecasting. Yes.
So I'm going to put a plug in for that. It is the best read around because it's got more than a trade journal, way more than a trade journal, but it doesn't carry all the detailed formulas that you get in an academic press. It's the best read around. Thank
you very much, Ken, for that. So check out your articles. You can check out our articles at JBF and IBF.org. And thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. That was a tremendous interview. Thank Ken again for being part of this, really providing those insights and more insights into exactly how we need to start working together. And that's really the first step, is to understand. We need to have that understanding of other functions. We need to have understanding of exactly what they're looking for. When I talked about the forecasting process, when we lay out this 5-step best practices in a forecasting process, you can find more about that at ibf.org or demand-planning.com. There's articles about that as well. When it talks a little about the principles of forecasting, demand planning, and really the process of it. The very first step of that process is understanding your customer. Focusing on the why really is what it is. Why are you even doing the forecast? I don't care if it's a weekly forecast. I don't care if it's a monthly forecast. I don't care if it's a budget you do once a year. An ad hoc, hey, I want to know information about this new product or what's going on here. Whatever your purpose of doing that forecast is, there's a reason behind it. There's a why. That's the first question you need to ask before you even start forecasting, because that's going to answer a lot more questions down the road. And in that why is, who is the customer? And I'm not talking about that external customer. I'm talking about your internal customer. Why do they need the forecast? Who's that customer? What are they looking for? What level of aggregation? What time frame? What data? What inputs do you need to get that? You need to understand your internal customer. One of the most valuable customers inside your organization is obviously going to be supply chain. It's obviously going to be that supply planning as well. That central planning, the way Ken talked about it, is going to be a key recipient of what you do on a day in and day out basis. They're one of your customers. But that's important. They're just one of your customers. We talk about CPFR, collaborative planning and forecasting replenishment. And really the concept about collaborative planning and forecasting replenishment is working with that external customer to have better visibility to what they have, to take out latency in the communication back and forth, and to be able to service them better. And you can get information so you can plan better as well. All the benefits of a CPFR. So why am I talking about CPFR? Think about that collaborative planning and forecasting inside your organization. Working with a supply chain, working with supply planning, working with finance, working with marketing, working with whoever that internal customer may be for you, that can provide better visibility. You can understand what they're seeing and when they see it. You can take out latency in that process of communication. You can increase the service of what they want and why they are utilizing your forecast. And guess what? You can get a lot of great feedback, information, insights, assumptions back in to your process that makes your forecast that much better. So kind of think of it as that internal customer planning, forecasting type of process that you're doing. So with that, we talked a lot about supply chain, one function. The same things I'm doing now, I'm going to love in the future, bring in someone from finance. Have the same dialogue with them and talk more about exactly that mile, walking a mile in their shoes. Working with product management, walking a mile in their shoes, marketing, I mentioned finance, executives, looking at other functions as well that are utilizing, consuming your forecast and going through the same process. There's ways you can get there. And one of the things, and I have just three different kind of recommendations, I would call them, as far as to go forward to kind of better understand that customer, build those bridges, and start improving your current internal processes. First, there's something you can give other functions and ask them to reciprocate back to you. I've seen companies do lunch and learns. I've seen town halls, whatever you want to call it, a traveling presentation, roadshow that you have. Something that explains exactly what it is that forecasting, demand planning, predictive analytics, your S&OP function, whatever you're doing, your role is. An explanation of exactly what you're doing. Because guess what? The same way we learned about other functions, they can learn about us as well. And I'd love to help put that together with you. If you have any questions, feel free. I put them together before. I can show you some examples. Reach out to me at eric@ibf.org. I'll share some examples I've used in the past with some other companies that really explains exactly what we do. If you need exactly insights, exactly what does a demand planner do, go to ibf.org. There's great insights of exactly what demand planning is, forecasting is, what we do, what a business forecast is. All those insights are laid out at ibf.org as well. But put together some type of lunch and learn, traveling roadshow, town hall with other functions inside your organization. You can do them virtually now. Guess what? Zoom works. Other platforms work. GoToMeeting, whatever you want to utilize. You can do those virtually now. Be working on putting those together and then ask them to put one together as well to share with your organization, your function. The second is find over different functions that may not be currently utilizing what you're doing. Think of a new product introduction. Think of a stage gate process that may exist inside your organization. How can you interject yourself into that process? Budgeting, an S&OP process, whatever it is where forecasting may not be playing the primary role. I'm not saying you need to play the primary role going forward. You just need to play a role going forward. There's a great example of that. There was an organization I worked for in the past, had a great stage and gate process, but really it was marketing and product management driven, which is fine. What they did though was they at some point tossed it over the wall, and that's when forecast got involved. So I started to interject my team into the process earlier in the first and second stage gate when it was still a just conception of what they were going to do. They didn't really have that funnel finalized yet. But they could still just, if nothing else, be a fly on the wall, start adding some inputs. And what happened, those relationships built at that point, and we found out what they were looking for, how they needed it, and found out ways we could improve their process. And we got information sooner in the process. We didn't have to wait until they threw it over the wall after it was already, 6 weeks from launch at that point. So we built that relationship. So find ways to interject your team, interject yourself into processes. People want help. People invite the information. You're not going in and taking over. You're going in there and helping them out. You're starting off as that fly on the wall, but then learning exactly what they need and catering your data and your information into insights they could use. And finally, talk about technology. We live in an ecosystem of technology. We have a platform we forecast in. But guess what? There's platforms out there that they're doing other things in as well. How do we start connecting those? How do they connect into what we have to get better insights and better information? The last company I was with, we did a great job of making sure that everything we were doing in that advanced planning system we were doing, that sales had access to be able to see. We wanted to be transparent. Marketing had access to it. Executives had access to this information so they could see exactly what made up the forecast, how we made up the forecast, how we were doing in the past. Transparent about everything in that system, but we will find ways to connect to the ecosystem and the technology they had as well. And that's one of the things I recommend. So put together those lunch and learns, those load shows. Find other processes you can start getting involved with, and then find ways technology can enable communication, and then technology can relate to other companies as well. So hopefully you found some more insights from this podcast. I'm enjoying doing this. Please let me know anything you want to see in the future. I can be reached at eric@ibf.org, or put the comments down below. And as always, thank you, Arkieva. Thank you for the special guest, Ken, today. And thank you more so, Arkieva, to being part of this podcast, making this available to the community, this team, this one team, one goal of IBF gurus that are listening and taking part in this as well. So thank you, Arkieva, for being part of this. And thank you, especially the IBF gurus out there, for being part of this as well. Look forward to catching you at the future podcast. Hope to catch you at future conferences. And don't forget, wash your hands.